Welcome to Insights in Touch, the podcast where industry insight meets meaningful conversation. Hosted by Kristin Thorne, this series, presented by iFraud Foundation, explores the real issues facing the property and casualty insurance world. It's the pulse of an industry under pressure and the voices working to protect its future. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in touch. Now, here's your host, Kristin Thorne.
We're going to bring in Earl Hall. He is the executive director of the Syracuse Builders Exchange, one of the largest groups of this type in New York State. Earl, I know you told me you have 1,100 members, everyone from union, non-union, suppliers, manufacturers, architects, engineers. So a huge group. Earl, thank you so much for joining us to talk. I know your number one thing you want to talk about is Scaffold Law. Bring me through your experience with the Scaffold Law. I know you were introduced to this law many, many years ago because that's how long it's been around.
Well, the law was introduced, from what I gather, back in the 1880s when all the skyscrapers in New York City were being built. And at a time where we didn't have workers' compensation, we didn't have OSHA. And so the law back in the day had its merits. Today, fast forward, and we continue to have this law on the books, the only state in the union that has it. I've been with the association now 33 years and executive director, I think, for 19 or so years. And one of the first chores I was assigned was to go to Albany and get this antiquated law reformed. A comparative negligence standard is what we were trying to achieve. And reviewing everything, I said, well, how hard can this be? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to have such a law while we have OSHA, while we have workers' compensation, we have all these other mechanisms that afford an injured worker the ability to recover and stay compensated and get back to work. So 33 years later, here we are trying to reform an antiquated law that impacts only employers in the state of New York.
Bring me through for people who, I'm sure most people watching this know about Scaffold Law, but I'm hoping that this podcast does reach people who are kind of trying to figure out what's going on in the business and the industry. How does the Scaffold Law affect negatively people, normal people in New York State?
Well, I'm looking at this from a construction contractor's perspective. As a small business owner in New York State, I represent contractors. So that doesn't mean that my contractors don't value their number one asset, employees. They do. But the statute as written is an absolute liability statute. It's not comparative negligence. Like every other component in our society and throughout the United States, you have the ability, theoretically, to argue your case before either a jury of your peers or before a judge. And you assign blame, i.e. a car accident. You assign blame. 60% is the driver of the red car and 40% is the driver of the blue car. In this case, it's extremely difficult to argue that. Most cases are settled out of court in advance of going before a judge. And the reason is that the statute is clear. The insurance companies tend to settle before it goes to a judge. Yes, one could point to a very select few cases where the contractor has had the ability to argue his case or her case, but those are extremely rare. And so essentially when someone is injured from a height perspective only, we're talking, of course, just heights. The statute here is a height of 3 feet or greater where you fall and you get hurt. That's where the statute comes into play.
And what does that mean for small contractors? Are they still able to work in New York? We know insurers are leaving. The Scaffold Law, everybody knows about this law. What does this mean for people trying to operate small contracting businesses in New York?
Well, theoretically, if we play this out, right, everyone's impacted equally, right? Because you're a contractor in the state of New York. You're all subject to this. So I'm assuming those contractors know that this is a liability to them. This law is a liability. So what do? They value that liability in some capacity. They can measure it based upon the size of the project, or they can measure it based upon past experiences, or they can forecast what they can expect. So what do? They build that into their bids. Okay. Now, yes, they are bidding to some private developers, private project owners, but there's so much construction in our state of New York where the public taxpayer is the owner of that project. So I would argue that on public work in the state of New York, to build a building, a 12,000 square foot public building, you name what it is, a school, a courthouse, whatever it might be, it will cost significantly more to build that building in the state of New York than it would to build it in the state of Pennsylvania. And I'll give you an example. The Goethals Bridge that I used to take quite a bit to get onto Staten Island and get off, half of it is in the state of New York, half of it is in New Jersey. Well, where do you think it costs more money to build that bridge? On which side? The state of New York. So, there's an example right there. But the bottom line is the taxpayers, the public, on public work, they're paying more money. They're getting ripped off to build the same building in the state of New York versus any other of the 49 states. So our contractors aren't taking it on the chin and say, oh, shucks, we're just going to pay the extra premium. They pass that along to the customer, whoever the customer is.
I know that, I'm sure you're aware of the staged accident fraud that's happening in New York City. Have you heard about it?
I have, yes.
Yeah. Can you explain to people how this affects? I hear from a lot of people, well, that's just happening in New York City. That's only affecting contractors and builders and people in New York City. Is this fraud affecting, let's say, some of your members in Syracuse?
We've seen it impact employers throughout New York State. And insurance carriers, they have actuaries. Those actuaries are employed to forecast future claims and to identify risk and liabilities, and then measure that and then build it into premiums to protect the insurance company. And you see that in the state of Florida and other states that are exposed to flooding and hurricanes. What we're finding in some states, some insurance companies are saying, hey, wait a minute. Our actuaries are saying, whether it's the state of California or the state of Florida, the risk to underwrite business in that state is too risky to us. Yes, we can charge a huge premium, but do we really want that risk? Do we really want that liability exposure? Carriers are saying, you know what? We don't need it there. We can go make money elsewhere. Same is true for New York. I mean, that isn't any different. It's not a natural disaster. This one's man-made, and nothing's being done about it. That's the problem. Our elected officials are asleep at the switch. And so carriers are saying, staged accidents, scaffold law, man, actuarially, they evaluate the liability and the risk. And when they do that, they say, you know what? Yeah, we could charge a higher premium, but let's just avoid that risk altogether and choose not to write it in that state. And we've seen some carriers choose to do that.
Bring me through your members. You have 1,100 of them. How does the scaffold law, how does the fraud that we see happening in terms of staged accidents, how is it really affecting them?
Well, that's hard to say for me. I mean, I'd like to get to know every one of my members individually and hear their stories. But I view the scaffold law in bucket A and these staged accidents in bucket B. Staged accidents on a job site, in most cases, don't pertain to the scaffold law. It's independent. It's still a huge liability, and it's still something that shouldn't be happening. But there you have increased payouts by the insurance company, and you really need to screen the employees that you bring in long before they're able to get onto your job site. That's the problem. I mean, labor, which I know is not part of this podcast, but labor right now is at such a premium. Employers are really looking to have able-bodied human beings that want to be in the industry employable. And you do your best to screen them. But in many cases, some of these employees that are being part of this practice are very tough to identify. But I think more importantly, it leads one to make sure that the job site is secure. In many cases, these stage accidents have nothing to do with being employed by a contractor. They're people who are on a job site that claim they get injured. And so securing a job site is really, really critical. But going above and beyond to secure a job site means more money. And you pass that along to who? The project owner. So at the end of the day, it's either the owner or the insurance company, or in most cases, both, end up paying for the fraud, not the contractor.
I know when you and I got in touch with each other and I offered for you I said, please come on the Insights in Touch podcast. I want to have you on. I could tell how passionate you are about scaffold law. And, Earl, you took a little bit of convincing. Why is this a sensitive, no, but I mean it. I mean, this is a sensitive topic for you. And why?
Well, the main reason is like I told you before, I was young and I was naive when I was hired here 33 years ago. I thought I could make a difference based upon common sense. I was wrong. And what I realized is that the trial lawyers lobby is powerful. And I'm hardened by the topic. I don't think in my career it will ever be changed. I have very strong opinions about the elected officials that serve in Albany. The interests that they look out for, I question at times, but we're the only state in the union that has this. And, people call it lobbying. You pay a lobbyist to advocate for your position. And I thought about that and I says, that's really nothing more than bribing someone. And it's a strong word, but essentially the trial lawyers lobby is so powerful and they have so much money, they will never allow any of this to be addressed, in my opinion. And it's an opinion, and I'm entitled to it. But my opinion is formed on 33 years of experience. And so I've been told by elected officials that your contractors don't support us. I said, what are you talking about? They support you. They vote for you. No. You don't support us with money, okay? And that was a wake-up call about 25 to 30 years ago. And money controls Albany. And as long as money controls Albany and those trial lawyers grease the pockets of our elected officials, okay, nothing's going to be done about this, in my opinion. I may be wrong, but God bless you and others like you for advocating and giving us a platform to effectuate change. And I appreciate you convincing me to be on with you, but I am not convinced in my career or my lifetime anything's going to be done about it.
Do you have even a little bit of hope?
Zero. Not until there's a significant shift in Albany with our elected officials. And that's based upon my experience.
I know. And it really does make you question. A reasonable person has to question why New York State is the only state in this country with this regulation.
So we have a career politician here in Syracuse who I will not name. I'll give you a hint. He's a male. He's a career assemblyman. I lobbied for scaffold law reform 20 years ago, if not longer, in his office. Got a form letter back. Thank you for meeting. I need to reach out to the other side of the aisle to get their position and to understand the issue better, he writes. Okay, I'll let you know some point my position. A decade goes by. I bring my contractors back. We sit in his office again. He doesn't show up, but one of his
aides,
interns or whoever shows up with a notepad and a watch. He says, what's the matter? What's the issue? We talk. He keeps looking at his watch as if we need to get out, writing notes. Anything else, he says. I keep my mouth shut. My contractors talk. He says, okay, thank you. Anything else? No, that's it. Okay, we'll get back to you. I say, excuse me. When will we know the assemblyman's position on this subject? It was Labor Law 240, 241. He basically read verbatim what the assemblyman wrote to me a decade before. Well, he says, we need to reach out to the other side of the aisle. We need to understand the matter more. We need to understand this and that. It was as if it was lip service, like we were bothering him to be there. And of course, at that point, I got a little boisterous and the chief of staff comes in. The point is, we're being lied to. They won't take a position. I'd rather have you say, no, we're not going to change it. I'm going to vote no on scaffold law reform. I'm okay with that. But don't think that we're stupid and you keep reading the same talking points for a decade and you won't tell me what your position is on the matter. And this assemblyman hasn't, and he won't. And we're not going anywhere until the trial lawyers lobby stops funneling all this money to the elected officials and we have a change in Albany. And I just don't see that happening.
Well, and so for people who, I can tell you, the data is there in terms of how much money the trial lawyers, the law pack gives to elected officials. This is all public. If people want to challenge Earl on any of this, you can go online. I've seen it. You can go look at how much law pack, which we know is the trial lawyers, gives to many Democratic politicians. And the Democrats are the strongest supporter of Labor Law 240-241. These aren't just opinions; these are facts, and I respect your opinion as well, Earl. And you are more within your right to say it. Is there anything else you want people to know, Earl, that I didn't ask you?
No, I'm just grateful people like you want to champion this cause, and Tom from the Lawsuit Reform Alliance. You know, I'm sorry I'm so hardened by it. I've been burned by it for 33 years, but I'm grateful for you. And I'm so grateful that you really convinced me to come with you today. I hope I didn't come across as too strong, but I'm just really hardened by it because I've always been raised by what's right and what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And I use the high school senior student prudence rule. I mean, if you're looking at this as a high school senior and you know the facts and circumstances, how would that high school senior view this subject? What would be their opinion of it? And for the life of me, from a common sense perspective, how anyone could argue otherwise is beyond me. But yet they do, and this law is still here. The stage accidents continue. That's a legal criminal matter, in my opinion. The other one is a statutory matter, and I separate them, but both are equally as important.
But I do think they play into each other. I do think that if we didn't have the scaffold law, in my opinion, makes it easy for fraud. It invites fraud. If you have a standard by which the person that you are staging the accident against has no remedy, it's perfect. You are automatically seen as innocent.
Well, that's a great point. And maybe I should have you talk more on the staged accident one, because you have a lot more experience in your career than I do on that one. So I could not agree more with what you just said.
Yeah. So I do think that the staged accidents in terms of construction are happening all over the country. New York is certainly an epicenter, and I think it's an epicenter because of this law. The scaffold law makes it too easy for this stuff to happen. And I believe that's why a lot of it is happening. Earl Hall, Executive Director of the Syracuse Builders Exchange. Thank you so much for joining us on the Insights in Touch podcast.
You're welcome.